Hello, ma'am. Hello.
Hi. Yeah.
Okay, ma'am. Shall I start the session? Okay.
Okay. Sure.
Yeah. Okay. Great. So, hi everyone. Good noon. A big shout out to Professor Karen Elliott and all our awesome participants. So glad to you are here. So we are about to dive into some really cool stuff on communication, how to make it click and truly connect. So feel free to jump in with your thoughts and your questions. It's a way more fun and it's a two-way street. So grab a coffee or juice, get comfy, and let's make this an engaging and insightful session together. So ready? Let's unlock the science behind powerful communication. So, ladies and gentlemen, and dear friends, it's an absolute delight to welcome you all to this exciting session on corporate digital responsibility for AI, urgent AI. We are living in a world where technology evolves faster than ever, and with that power comes responsibility. Today, we are here to explore how organizations can act mindfully and ethically as they embrace AI and Gen AI in their operations. As the proverb goes, with great power comes great responsibility. This would not be more relevant than in today's digital age. Whether you are a enthusiast, a business leader, or just a curious about the future of AI, this conversation is just for you. CDR is not just a buzzword, it's a mindset that blends innovation with integrity. And that's what we are diving into. So get comfy and stay curious and feel free to engage throughout the session. We want to hear your perspectives, ideas, and even your questions. This is a space for learning and growing together. And we are well so glad to have each one of you on this journey. So let's make it an inspiring and insightful time ahead. Before we begin Professor Karen's session, I would like to take a moment to introduce her. So, all right, everyone, I hope you are ready for some serious inspiration because we are absolutely thrilled to welcome Professor Karan to today's session. She is not only a trailblazer in the world of fintech and ethical digital innovation, but also someone who truly leads your purpose and vision. As the saying goes, leadership is not about the titles, it's about impact, influence, and inspiration. And that perfectly sums up Karan's journey. And currently serving as a chair and full professor in finance and fintech at the University of Birmingham. Karan Gorak directs the fintech MSc programming and brings a wealth of experience from both academia and the real world. From her recognition as one of the top 35 women in fintech power list to steering ethical AI projects like Strabble.ai and the Infinity Hub, her work is paving the way for a more responsible and inclusively digital future. What makes Karan stand out even more is how she blends deep academic knowledge with real world action. Whether it's advising fintech startups, shaping ESG strategies, or leading groundbreaking initiatives like Finclusion, she is always pushing the boundaries for good. We are truly honored to have her with us today, and I can't wait for all of you to hear her insights on creating a digitally responsible world. So let's give her a warm and virtual round of applause. And before we get started with today's session, I want to take a quick moment to introduce you to Temstech Solutions, a pioneering venture that's reshaping the world of technology. At Temstech Solutions, we believe in the power of innovation, excellence, and affordability, ensuring that cutting-edge engineering, management, and scientific tech solutions are accessible to all. As Steve Jobs once said, innovation is distinguished between a leader and a follower. We strive to lead the way in transforming industries with our expertise. From digital marketing, web designing, and server management to AI power tools and mobile app development, our services cater to a diverse range of industries, including aerospace and defense, electronics and energy, medical applications, and industrial research. Our commitment to tailor the business solutions ensures that every client gets the strategy and technology they need to thrive in a fast changing world. As Henry Ford wisely said, coming together is the beginning, staying together is the progress, and working together is a success. So, beyond the business, we believe in giving back and building the future. So, our initiative, Mastering Up, is a dedicated to equipping young learners with the skills they need to succeed. We invite you to join us in empowering the next generation because, as the Nelson Mandela once said, education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. So let's innovate and inspire and create a brighter tomorrow together. Okay, so at the end, I would like to introduce the motto of Professor Karan, empowering ethical innovation for a fairer, smarter, and digital future. So finally, I would like to hand over this session to Professor Karan, and also thanks a lot for joining us today. And over to you, ma'am.
That's okay. Thanks very much for having me, and everybody who's turned up to listen for your time. I mean, this is a really interesting period in time. So the reason you'll have heard of corporate social responsibility, but now we've got corporate digital responsibility to reflect that we're actually in the digital era. You want to move on to the next slide for me? So what I'm going to talk about is these key topics, because as was mentioned in the intro, one thing that's been a feature of my career throughout when I was in industry for nearly 18 years and then flipped over into academia is about being curious, but also thinking critically about issues that come up. And particularly now we're in such a rapidly moving innovation space. So I tend to focus on finance and fintech, which you can imagine in your country and in mine or wherever you're based. It's how we transact. If we can't do our finances digitally, then we're actually losing out. So I'm going to look at the misuse of data in digital technologies, including when we talk about misinformation, disinformation, and the damage that can have, the social technology dimensions, about people, about agentic AI, which has kind of come into public consciousness in about the last month or so. And then talk about the framework. What is it? Whose responsibility is? And then touch over a few questions to maybe go away with, think about in your own roles, and hopefully make you curious about your role and responsibility in this digital future. Can I have the next slide, please? So this might seem like a curious thing to put on the screen, but if you think about it, when we talk about data, who creates it? If we think about academically, we talk about epistemology, which is what is knowledge and how do we attain that knowledge. Data becomes knowledge once it's taken into the machine learning process. So I'm assuming I'm talking to a lot of people who are already very familiar with machine learning, deep learning, and also then aggregating up to AI, which has now got more autonomy to actually make decisions for us, particularly in agentic AI. So the reason is, when you think here, if you're taught as a computer scientist, a data analyst, etc., you make the decisions about what is data. The people around you make decisions of what is data, and that goes all the way through the decisions that are made from design through to implementation. And also with the EU AI Act coming into force, you're also responsible once it's deployed. So always remember that digital starts and ends with people. We make the fundamental decisions about what is data, how it is used, how it is categorized. And machine learning is complex statistical models. So therefore, they are based on our decision of what goes into those metrics, how we gather them, and how we treat them. Next slide, please. So most of you will know what AI is. So it goes through these different sort of sessions. So it acts because of a rule, either to look at cruise control, and like we know some of the difficulties around automated vehicles. They're still not mainstream as yet, but it has this predictability, and it is getting much better, particularly in finance, being able to predict whether somebody's going to default or pay their loans, whether we can predict how the stock markets are going to work, although with Trump around, who knows when we've got tariffs. But then he has this ability to learn and create and relate and then master and evolve. And I'm talking about agentic AI later because that's the next era of evolution, to adapt to the environment and actually make decisions and learn from those decisions and move that bar forward. So you just go to the next slide, please. So we have 5 levels of concern. So from a responsibility perspective, you won't be unfamiliar with these. So personal privacy, particularly when you look at West versus East in the world, the West are more concerned with personal privacy. So we have GDPR Act. It's about making sure you have access to data, knowing who's got access to your data, and giving that consent for that data to be shared. Now, that's slightly different when you get into the East, where you've got super apps and Alibaba and Ant Financials, etc., because the relationship to owning data is slightly different and something we'll come back to. But we also have implicit bias because we know in financial worlds that the credit scoring system is not perfect. Although we're starting to predict more, the actual way we collect those metrics creates a bias around where you live. So in the UK, for example, if you live in a certain area that is known to be high crime, there will be a bias in the algorithm that you might be a risk of not paying, and therefore you have to pay more. So that becomes a poverty premium. So the poorer in society who are more likely to live in high crime areas actually paying more for products and services because the system in the algorithm says there are more probability of not paying. There's also a push on accountability because you think, as we talk about responsibility, who is accountable when these things go wrong? So I've been a victim of fraud. Before, I've had my cards cloned. There was a security breach at a university I was at before Birmingham, and many staff had their identity kind of taken and used. So then it's only when these things when things go wrong in the system, that people want to know who's accountable, who's culpable, who's going to give me my money back if someone manages to hack into my account. So this is what we mean about taking decisions, actions, project outcomes. And in your roles, think about where is the accountability of what you're doing with this new technology. Well, I mean, deep learning is not new, AI is not new, but now we've got more computing power. The possibilities and the extent of how we can use this technology needs us to think about accountability. And also about agency. How do you opt out? How do you stop? If you've got a smartwatch, you've got a smartphone, you are being tracked in effect. People can find out where you are, what you're doing, what you're buying. If you're transacting digitally, there is a footprint of where you're spending your money. So the AI can then build an arbitrary profile of who you are, where you shop, how much you're spending, how you budget, etc., etc. And this is where the innovation comes in, because in an era of open banking, moving to open finance using APIs and DeFi and blockchain and all these new technologies, we've now got an accelerated pace of innovation, which I'll come to when I talk about agentic AI. Next slide, please. I'm just going to touch on each one of these in a little bit more detail. So when we think about our own personal privacy, and you might think, oh, well, it's not such a big deal, but when it goes wrong, this is when it becomes important, right? So Susanna Zuboff, who I talk about surveillance capitalism here, she's got a really thick book if you need something to read at bedtime, but talks about when we look at the big techs, they have control over our data in a certain extent. We don't know what Zuckerberg is doing with your data off Facebook. We know it can be hacked. We know it can be cloned. But as we've seen in front of juries and senates, they don't really still know how they work because there's too much money involved with Elon Musk, etc., as we've seen since the Trump government has moved in. And also we can look at different models in India and Africa where, can you leverage insights without having to transfer data? And the GDPR Act is about that. You can only hold on to data if you have it for a specific purpose, and you can only hold it for a certain amount of time. And as an individual in the West, you can ask for it to be deleted and to be forgotten. So it's a right to be forgotten. So there's a lot of issues around personal privacy, how we use the data. So if you go on to the next slide, please. And this feeds into the concept of bias, because as we know, we've seen with security cameras before that they are trained. If you think about most computer scientists from Silicon Valley, if we use that as a generalization, what becomes data comes from a white Western perspective, and then it rolls out across the world. It is changing, it is getting better, but we still have these prejudices about skin color, about being able to train the machines to understand the difference between our different facial features, where we come from. And this bias, as I said before, influences decisions that companies make, whether they lend products to you in finance. And as I said, I talk mainly about finance because that's my area, but this also rolls out into healthcare, into education, into all aspects of your life, politics, etc. The biases can actually be influenced. We had the Cambridge Analytica scandal in the previous American elections, where it was found that they were influencing the way people were voting. And then it also, having worked in industry, I know like credit scoring, it can influence how the data is created, becomes knowledge, and is modified and creates these red flags around risk. Because let's face it, when you're working in business, it's about maintaining your business reputation and competitive advantage, but also mitigating and working out the risks to that and keeping at the top of your game. So this is why business logic is now data heavy, because they want more data, they want customer feedback, but we have to be careful that we're not introducing bias. Now, can you have something that is 100% bias free? No. Why? Because humans create it, and humans, as we know, are not bias free. We make a judgment call. Whenever we meet someone, within 10 seconds, we kind of scan what they're wearing, what they look like, their skin color, their sex, their gender, etc. And we make a decision what we think they're like. Now, that might change, but usually your initial assessment doesn't vary that much. Now, you can imagine if that goes into your data, then that becomes a bias. And even when we put out a survey and get the data back, we're adding more bias at each stage by making a judgment call based on our own background, culture, educational status, etc. And this is why the concept of ethics comes into it, what we should and what we ought to do to have fair and equitable society. And this is what is not coming through a lot of businesses. It's still not a fair process. People who are deemed poor are paying more for services that you and I take for granted. And to me, that is not fair. It should be slightly different. Next slide, please. And this leads into accountability. So if we know all those details, that we have to think critically about what we're doing with data, how we're using it, try to stand back and reduce the level of our own biases that we bring in, or what we've been taught from our disciplines of computer science, business, etc. We have to look at these issues. I mean, the black box is still there. I assume that most of you listening know what the black box is. So the deep learning stage, we don't fully understand how through computing and weighting in the neural network we get to the outcome, but we frame it in a level of accuracy. And this is also an issue around AI. And I'll talk later about the accuracy, because people expect AI to be 100% accurate. And we all know if you use a chatbot or a large language model, you don't always get the right answer. And again, it goes back to the point, starts and ends with people. If you're using large language model, the sources they're using are taken from various sites across the internet, and they're not accurate because they come from us. Again, it's full of bias, etc. So you have to think about, even when you've got automated decision making, is it right? So an example in the legal field, I've been working with a legal company as well, introducing Copilot. But what's happened in the legal system is the hallucinations from AI have actually meant that cases that do not exist, they are fictitious, have actually ended up in court because somebody didn't realize that what came out of that automation decision making was actually the AI hallucinating. So therefore, we have to think carefully about the design, the development, the deployment, and the monitoring with a human in that loop of what we do to be accountable with CDR. Next slide, please. And therefore, this comes to you. You want to be free, okay? You want You want to work together. We're at the stage now where human and machine intelligence are merging, and I love innovation and change, but I'm also a critical realist from a theoretical standpoint and think that we have to be careful, because if you run fast and break things, there's no going back. And we don't know the full extent of what we're doing with AI right now. And you want freedom of thought. We know there's vloggers and bloggers and influencers, but we want to have that freedom of action. I mean, if you just look at the news now, it tends to be a lot of doom and gloom. Do you have the freedom just to shut off from that, to come out of social media, to actually create your own thoughts? And also at the point in time where textual growth becomes uncontrolled and irreversible, like I say, if we move fast and break things, what do we do when harm is being created? Because again, from an ethical standpoint, you should do no harm with what you create. And this is why I'm hoping one of the big takeaways from here today is to critically think about your position in your organizations or your education or training or whatever you're doing at the moment, to critically think and be curious and ask pertinent questions of where the data come from, who makes the decisions, and does it still allow for human agency? Okay, next slide, please. And this leads us very nicely into invention and innovation. So we think if you want to do something novel, invention is something that usually comes from the subconscious. As Einstein said, logic never creates something new. It comes from the subconscious and becomes real when we create it. And then innovation is the change that creates value. You'll always hear businesses talking about value add, creating value. How do we do something that differentiates our USP for our clients? And this is where we're in a massive state of change right now. I mean, I don't think one person can keep up with the rate of change. We've got quantum coming in, we've got agentic AI, and companies feel left out. So it's a FOMO, fear of being left out if you don't actually take this up. And with deep learning being heightened by computing power, and that scales up to AI, we need to think about how we look at maximizing the values that benefits everybody in society. At the same time, looking at, we want the value, we don't want to stop innovation, but we also need to think about the governments, the human in the loop. On to the next slide, please. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the research that I've been doing. So my main research partner is head of computer science here at Birmingham, and I've worked with him in a previous institution for about the last 8 years. So we've been looking at this socio-technical space and looking at trust, because if you think about it, it's a big issue. We tend to implicitly trust digital apps, etc., until they go wrong. So what is a trusted app or platform from a computer scientist point of view? Again, it's acceptance dependent. So you're looking from an engineering perspective, what is within that acceptance level? So here it's about security and privacy, making sure that system's secure, making sure there's no backdoors that hackers can get into. Where on the flip side, and where I sit in the middle between this as a socio-technologist, is looking at making sure that machines are learning in the right way. So having done a lot of risk management roles in industry, one of my big questions about 10, 11 years ago was, okay, so we set the AI off, it goes to learn, we've taught it what to learn, but it has autonomy. So what if it learns in the wrong way? And we've seen examples of that. And now we're improving and doing better and looking at how we make it more trustworthy, how we start to think about these things. But my last note there is the reality that everybody has their interpretation of trust, whether from the technical engineering side or what human trust is like. But you know yourselves, if you're going to use a new app, you've usually had it recommended by word of mouth by somebody else and said, oh, why don't you jump on this? We can communicate by this. Oh, jump on this app. You'll get a better deal on your car insurance or your house insurance, or this new bank, this new neobank or new fintech is offering better deals. You can get a better return on your investment. So that's the reality of trust is built in different ways from an engineering and from a social perspective. Next slide, please. And building on this, we also want to understand, so say, as happens with some research I've looked around financial inclusion, people have been refused access to financial credit and products and services. But when they ask why, the answer now is, well, the algorithm says no. Now, you put yourself in that person's shoes, it's not a very transparent response because you don't know why you're being refused. If you're able to pay your rent and you've never been behind in any payments and suddenly you get refused, you don't know why. So this is why you're starting to look at informational transparency, participatory transparency, and accountability. Because the reality is we've got to move beyond purely technical approaches to guarantee it's accurate, to actually think about the context and legality and legibility of what we're doing. Because with the new regulations coming up, like the EU AI Act that is now in force, we have to be able to try and explain as best we can. There's still a problem with the black box, but as best we can, how we got to the actual answer if we're refusing somebody access to something, whether that's finance, health, education, any service, insurance, property, etc. Next slide, please. And what we did in some research here was look at, on this side where you see benevolence, integrity, ability, and predictability, that's a social concept of trust. So thinking that if you interact with somebody, say 10 interactions when you first meet a new potential friend, and 8 out of 10 times you feel that they've got the benevolence towards you, they're interested in you, they've got the integrity to want to work in your best interest, to be in your company, and then the ability to look after you as a friend, and you can predict that 8 out of 10 times they will have your best interests at heart. You're going to keep them as a friend. Now, if that falls below, say, 5 out of 10, you're going to question this cycle. And I'd say as we flip it over onto the more high-leveled kind of informational transparency, it's really difficult to marry those two together, but we are getting better. Next slide, please. And therefore, what I want you to think about is what we created in a paper here a few years ago now, but thinking about trustworthiness. So looking at the data collection, which I mentioned, who decides what is data that becomes knowledge? What inference do we take from that? How do we test it? Do we put a human in there to make sure we're getting it ready? Then how do we train it and check it? Feature extraction, how do we know we've got the right things to do? All of this is critical thinking. This is not to do with technology. This is the human aspect of each of these stages, thinking about how are we building data trust and also societal trust to make sure we can explain. So this is why we have the fees system. Next slide, please. So now moving into the current context, because that, like I say, that was an older paper. But now in the last month, I'm sure you've heard of agentic and AI agents. So the differentiation between an AI agent and moving into agentic is that the agentic is a more active, usually a masculine associated word in essence, to show that they've got reasoning and problem solving. So I have a little bit of problem with that as a female, but anyway. Now it's moved on to have these increased abilities. So it's got more independence. It can actually draw across all different databases because of the LLM capacity. It is now learning from past actions and feedback. It has advanced reasoning algorithms. The algorithms, as we know, are improving. In the last decade, they've improved immensely in their ability to reason and also deal with non-linearity. Because if you've ever read an academic paper, usually the model is linear, right? You follow a structured process. But we know humans are non-linear. Life is non-linear. You don't know. The day before lockdown was very different to the day we locked down. The day before President Trump coming in and talking about tariffs was very different to now we have tariffs. So this is why you have to have this advanced reasoning and think about your environment. And these new generation of agentic AI are good. And they are claimed to increase transparency and explainability. Next slide, please. But I'm going to come back to that because it's interesting. So this is a little slide by somebody on LinkedIn, actually, Pandy, who is a systems engineer. And as you can see here with the RAG system, what we've got here is the advancement where you've got the agent actually taking decisions, pooling these tools together to make it flow a bit better. And if we look at the next slide, we can see how the skill set is changing around what we need from engineers and academics. So if you go on to the next slide, please. So here again, this was something that I saw on LinkedIn the other day. So the top 50 kind of areas, it's a bit small, but we can share these slides afterwards. So you can see we've got error analysis coming, dynamic prompting, API route limiting, agent cooperation, self-consistency prompting, multi-agent systems. So you have a agentic AI where you've got different agents talking to each other to improve the accuracy of system. So great, right? We think maybe this is the way to solve the problem of responsibility because it's going to make it more efficient. Okay. The first signs are, yes, it's more efficient and it does increase the accuracy. However, in recent, like early case studies that have come out of finance, what they found is when they've started to plug these agents in between the LLMs to get more accuracy from the prompts and to use the tools and make decisions, the agentic AI rates itself as phenomenally good as customer satisfaction. However, when they spoke to the humans, customer satisfaction actually dropped for the company by 18%. Now, for those of you in business will know, dropping by 18% is a lot, and you want to understand why. And it was because they felt that they weren't getting the prompts back. So we know chatbots weren't great, okay, the first iteration of AI agents. Now, they are supposed to be better. So we need to put a bit of a pin before we all jump to agentic AI is the panacea for the problems we had, in that some of the sim problems are still there. Why? It comes back to people. It's not a technology, because underneath, as parts of this, people have fed in what is data, what it learns, and then it spits it back at you. It's as simple as that. The next slide, please. So to sum up this part of the presentation, wicked problems are problems that are not easily resolved. So if you've got a complicated problem, such as the air traffic flight of a plane, you can easily take one plane out of that system and it won't collapse. Now, a wicked problem is about complex systems, which is such as our political system, our financial system, our economy. If you take elements out, the system will collapse, as we saw in COVID. The knock-on effect of the interdependence between the different systems caused a breakdown that we had to lock down. So what I talk about here is we've got the fees system. So we want to look at fairness, explainability, auditability, and safety of what we're building. So this means data-related trust solutions and model-related solutions. And this requires critical thinking to think about the use of agentic AI. Who checks them? And this feeds into trust. Although we might have built what we see as a trusted, acceptable platform to actually put out there for our customers, as we've seen with early case studies, the machine is rating itself as much better at doing the task than the humans are satisfied with. So we've got to be careful there. And the social trust as well, this leads into it. If that breaks down and they start to doubt your system, you're going to lose customers, which leads to a risk to your system and your income. And given today's geopolitical system, that's not a good thing. And as we say, this is evolving. This is why risk management and safety is starting to elevate, looking at how do we audit AI? How do we put a human in the loop? And how do we contain it? So Suleiman, who was one of the first founders of DeepMind, said the problem is we don't know how to contain AI. Therefore, it's difficult to make sure it doesn't go too far, and we do harm with what we're building. There is also a skills gap. So I know in the UK, they're crying out for qualified people, and we can't produce them quick enough in universities or training companies to the level that is experienced enough to recognize that, as I said before, if an LLM kicks out a legal case that doesn't exist, if you don't have the experience to recognize that that case does not exist, you are going to pass it off as thinking that is a genuine case. Now, if you think about the ramifications of that across your particular sector or finance or education, that mistake could have massive unintended consequences. So we need to look at the skills gap. And this is where I think that universities and industry can work much closer together. Next slide, please. So again, this is like, why should you care? Why should you care about all of this? Because we're all living in a digital society and we are interdependent. Like I say, COVID is an extreme example of how something can cascade across all the systems in the world and basically shut us down from a very small bacterial virus. Now, if you think about that, we've had instances where Stripe has failed and different machine systems have failed, and it's shut down systems where people can't transact, they can't get money out of their accounts, or money has gone missing, etc. So we need to think about all these principles I've talked about. Next slide, please. And let's say I have studied social sciences a lot, so good old Karl Marx. Capitalism tends to destroy nature and human beings. And we're doing a good job of this, because if we think about it from CDR perspective as well, that digital comes with a cost on the environment. It's not just what we're doing. We've all heard about the cost of Bitcoin, which may or may not be true. That's starting to get better to look at its footprint. But also, we need to take care of human beings. We need to ensure that we're getting broad and diverse data sets. So I'm in Birmingham, UK, very diverse. If I looked at most of the data sets that I work on, they don't reflect people who work and live 15 miles from the university campus. Is that fair? Maybe think about that. Next slide, please. So from this perspective, corporate digital responsibility is still relatively nascent in academia. When I first started looking at this about 8-9 years ago, there were 6 papers, 6 academic papers and a few business reports. Now it's actually being taught in a lot of universities across the world. And Rob Price, who runs a agentic AI company now, set up CDR.net. If you want to look it up, it's all one word, corporate digital responsibility.net. And that is a group of practitioners, academics, consultants from MIT right across to Japan. This is now being translated into multiple languages to actually look and tackle these things across the social, the economic, and the environmental responsibility. Next slide, please. And I put this here because how it differs from CSR, it's like a blend to take not only the physical consequences, but actually recognize the societal consequences across those 3 domains, and how we can actually add an extra layer by taking care in the digital domain. And you might think again, okay, so why should I care about this? Because you're part of this. You can't extract yourself from the digital world. You can do if you really opt out, but it's difficult now to pay with money. It's difficult to access to go and buy a coffee. If you try to use cash, you'll be refused in many places. It's card only. Why? Because it's more efficient and effective for finance companies to get rid of branches and to actually have everything online. But what if you can't get online? This is also right in the middle, you can't see there, but purpose and trust and inclusion for all. So if you've got the next slide, we have 7 principles of AI, CDR, sorry. This is purpose and trust, fair and equitable access for all. Now, if we think about that, it's our kind of responsibility individually to think about that in our jobs. I think about it about education. How can I work across the education sector to actually open it up to people who haven't perhaps had the chances I've had when coming out of industry? And then as you read through all of these, thinking about preserving the climate, how do we preserve planet and people to actually move forward? So next slide, please. And do you think that it's a human right that we have access to these things? We like to know who is using our data to influence different things. Do we have complaints procedure? What about identity? Because digital identity can be stolen as well and used irresponsibly. And what about the harm to you when that happens? Now, we're still debating all of this. There are lots of regulation coming up, but it's always behind the innovation. So we've always got that fight going on. And if you go on to the next slide, I'll just broaden it out into like how it affects the world. If you go on the next slide, please. So we're thinking here, it goes right from government and companies to community and academia, to schools, to family, to think about how we use this safely. Because I'm sure if you think about, you will know someone who's maybe had something, misinformation, disinformation post-spam, or taken in some misinformation and used it. I mean, we saw it around the Trump campaign, right? Lots of misinformation, disinformation that goes on. But we can also see that in sharing it, this can also have an impact on people. And there's all sorts of pressures and mental health problems that are now arising over not doing this well. Like I say, some of it's a little bit small, but you can have the slides afterwards. And this is what I really want you to think about, an ecosystem that each of us is individually responsible for what we do on a daily basis. Because if we don't, what's going to happen? We're going to have an impact on our sisters, our friends, our family, etc. And they might not be as digitally savvy as you. They might not understand the risks of giving your details, your data away, and how that can then wipe out your bank accounts. Okay, a lot of elderly people in this country have their pensions stolen, their savings stolen. And again, that's not fair to me. Next slide. So I want to finish off this final bit and then I'll open it up to questions. Is machine learning, after what we've just discussed, do you think it's an objective process? Because as MasterCard put in the Harvard Business School review, that trust is the currency of innovation. If people don't trust what you're doing, and if we go back to Ava Ludless saying garbage in, garbage out, if you just throw more data in until you get the right answers or it starts looking right, is that really an objective process? No. It still comes back to the human that's making the decision. And this leads into the next issue that comes up. This is the questions at the end. So next slide, please. In July this year, I'll be teaching at a summer school in France. And I was speaking to one of my fellow lecturers there. And we were just talking about agentic AI because we're focusing on that, obviously, because businesses are starting to use it, the world's starting to use it, but we still got the trouble with confabulations. Okay, so Hearst, who resigned in America and stepped down as a famous professor, said the confabulation, aka hallucinations, is a big problem because if you think about it, humans do. If I come back in a year and ask you to recall this very lecture, you will all have taken different things from it, but you might not remember it quite in the right way. And your memory, your own little computer in here, your deep learning neural network, will pull out different bits. So why do we expect the AI to do anything different? In essence, it's kind of dreaming in bubbles. It will pull up things. So a very simple example was my colleague online showed me using agentic AI, how he checked his own company details, and they were entirely wrong. Now, you think if something as simple as that can't link to the IP address of the person who's checking and make a decision, then we still have problems around these decisions. So we have to be careful. Next slide, please. And this brings us back to people as well, because Voltaire, as you can see from the picture, lived a long time ago. But he said, are humans rational? I think the only problem with common sense is that it's not very common, and particularly when this little word comes in. When we get stressed, you think about myself, or when you're stressed, you're working towards a deadline, you've got multiple things to do. Do you make the right decisions? And this is one of the problems that we've talked about, the hallucinations. How did a legal case that doesn't exist get to the court? Now, you think of all the processes that it has to go to of due diligence, allegedly, before it's presented to court. Why did it happen? Because when people are stressed, they will make an assumption that the person below them in that chain will have done the checking to make sure that everything was correct. And when we do that, we take it for granted that somebody's done it. So this is why it's very difficult. And once we're stressed, we're not very rational. This is why we're non-linear. And this is why it's hard to map the human brain, because we don't fully know how it occurs under stress, dealing with multiple tasks. There's still a lot we don't know. So in the neural network, we're still guessing to a certain extent within levels of acceptance how it works. Next slide, please. And the other questions we need to ask is about regulation. So we always have this discussion. I advise multiple founders in fintech every year, and it's always, regulation is stopping us doing this. Now, what the regulators have done and advise here in the UK is they've opened up sandboxes, right? We have digital sandboxes where innovators and founders can go and show their new ideas about how they're going to work within the regulatory space in the UK. Okay, like I said, the West and East are very different, but it's highly regulated for finance and the legal sector in the UK and the West. So we need to think about regulation. As I said, the EU issued the AI Act, where companies have to determine whether they're high, medium, or low risk in the use of their AI. Now, how many companies are going to say, I'm high risk, come and evaluate me? No, most companies are going to self-evaluate as low to medium risk. But in the era of agentic AI, how do we know? Like I say, until we start checking and see what customer satisfaction is like, how we're still favored by our human customers, delivering services by our agentic AI, then regulation needs to be there, because as I said, when it goes wrong, it's the regulator who has your back, who protects, at least in the UK, protects your funds and will make sure the bank refunds you if somebody fraudulently takes your money. In a DeFi, crypto, blockchain space, different, that is not regulated, but is under discussion. And this is why we always have this press. Innovation is moving much quicker than the regulators, but do we need regulation? I would say that we do, because everybody wants some backup when something goes wrong. Next slide, final slide, just to finish off. So, okay, why now? All CDR is just a framework to guide your impact decision making. It's not a panacea. It's not the only one out there. It is one that will help you think about your responsibility in whatever role you're doing, to think through where there are areas of risk and where you might be, without doing it intentionally, actually cutting off people from accessing digital services and products, whether that's finance, as I said, health, education, etc. And again, we can't measure everything, because we know with statistics, as we said, they are flawed. Disraeli said there's statistics, damn statistics, and then there's lies. You know, they're not perfect. I've taught statistics for a long time, and you can merge two metrics together to get more significance, like we said with the putting more things in your machine learning to get a better result. So you have to stay curious, you have to challenge, and you have to think about your responsibility. Because if you want access money to do the innovation, you've got to think about this. You've got to be responsible. You've got to be compliant to the regulators. You want access to talent, and you want talent that thinks in this way. And you want to avoid reputational damage. So on those notes, last slide, I'll just say thank you. I hope that it's been a good use of your time this morning, and that it's raised some questions for you to think about, because I'm continually curious. I'm continually learning. As you say, this space moves very fast. And I'll stay quiet and see if there's any questions.
Yeah, sure. So first of all, thank you so much for this wonderful presentations. So I have some questions here. So shall I ask the questions?
Right?
Shall I ask the questions now?
Ask questions.
Yeah, great. So in my first question, how will companies ensure transparency in decision-making processes driven by Gen AI?
What they need to do is, I'm working with a company that's looking at predicting how people should invest for wealth management. And what we've been doing with them is using NLP to look at sentiment analysis, and then testing the algorithms to see for accuracy, to make sure that we're doing, but we can explain the decision making at each process. Like I say, it's never going to be 100% perfect, but at each stage, we want to show the customer how we make the decisions and what data we're using to reach the decisions, to advise them on the best decision to invest their money to get the return on investment. So this is how we can move towards. All we can do is do gradually better, because everything's moving so quickly, but acknowledging that we have to think about the decisions and then be held accountable to explain how we're going. Because like I say, the black box issue is still there. We can't fully explain everything.
Yeah, thank you, ma'am. So in my next question, what role will CDR play in preventing algorithmic bias in future AI systems?
Yeah, I'm actually working with IEEE, so that's the Institute of Electric and Electronic Engineers, and we just wrote a white paper that was accepted on CDR, and we gave some examples from industry, and now they've decided to make that their underpinning framework to actually influence and get the kind of awareness out there when you're actually electrical or an engineer working in this sector with machine learning. Because the way it works is to actually, like today, to get actually people critically thinking about, where is this data coming from? Can I challenge it? Do I have the ability to challenge it? Because on the softer side of things, if you're in an organization, do you have the psychological safety, if you're just coming into that industry, to actually challenge it and go, there's some bias here, or I don't fully understand how we're doing this with our machine learning. How do I report back to customers that I've made this decision? And that's how CDR is going to work. So as I working with IEEE to get it becoming a standard, a global standard, because IEEE is well over 1,000 academics and practitioners working to create standards around how we build machine learning and engineering. And secondly, working with people like the World Bank in the UN to raise it in their commissions as well. And then spreading to all the kind of companies that you work with to say, look at this framework. It's not perfect, but it will actually give you a way to decision make. And I say over the last 8 years, I've seen it go from basically very little to now that are about to write a chapter in a book and a handbook on CDR. There are now books coming out on how companies can integrate. There's a maturity model. So like if you want to rate your competencies, you can now rank yourself on 1 to 5 of how CDR is being embedded in your company. And that actually makes it better, because it's all right saying it's a framework, but how do you know you're embedding it across all your different operations and making it work from DevOps right through to senior management? So there's different tools now to do it.
Okay, okay. Thank you, ma'am. How can organizations balance innovation with ethical responsibility as Gen AI capabilities grow?
Yeah, I think with Gen A, it's something that we have to balance. I think at the moment it's not being asked enough. Like I was listening to a presentation by a data company, and I asked them a few questions around this. How have you checked the data? Have you thought about the possibility of hallucinations? Who is the human in the loop who does the audits to make sure what you're doing is responsible? And not every company is doing it. So I think what we need to do when we're moving forward, like I say, we don't want to move too fast and look back in 5 years and think we've done a lot of damage. We need to start to think individually about the ethics of what we should and what we ought to do with our data. Are we really just following what we've been taught, either on a training course or at university, that this is how you do machine learning, and we don't ask any questions? And the only time it gets questioned is if the customer has an issue. Or do we actually take responsibility for our own kind of role in that whole kind of schema and start to think about it? Because if we don't, it's very easy to just go, it's not my fault. You know, I was just doing what I was told. And we've heard that in history for a lot of problems. So I think ethically, it is coming through. There are actually certifications you can get for humanity, for instance, do certifications in ethical AI, auditing AI, responsible development of AI. And that's come about in the last sort of 5 to 10 years, where it didn't exist before. And companies are really starting to embody it.
Oh, great. So thank you, ma'am. What frameworks might emerge to govern digital responsibility in a global AI-driven economy?
To drive the economy, I think the generations now, because I would say the younger generations, like my son's in his 20s studying, and they're more aware of asking questions of companies, and social media is one tool to do that, although it's double-edged. You know, you don't know what they're using your data for sometimes, but it's also a powerful tool to highlight when companies are not providing services. So for example, I know we all get things where we get advertisements. I always look up on Trustpilot to see if it's a scam, if it's a clothing company or something like that. Is it legitimate? And that's the power of having that. And I think where CDR can add to it is that it will become more embedded and taken as a norm. So I've worked with several companies where they've been reasonably ethical, but then started to look at their HR departments and say, are you asking pertinent questions of your engineers? Do they think about ethics by design when they're creating their frameworks and parameters for machine learning? When they aggregate it up to AI, do they keep checking to make sure it's learning in the way they expect it to? And now you're also responsible when it's put out there. And there's been a change in the wording in a lot of tenders from company to ask people to engage in responsible business. So I think the narrative is changing. We're moving, I mean, Trump has done a lot of damage around ESG, but people still talk about sustainability, and ED&I and things like that all come part of CDR. You know, we need to include different ethnicities. We need to include women. Women need to have a voice. You know, there's not enough women in tech, which I'm also passionate about, because if your voice isn't in the data, how are you going to get products and services that are best served to you and don't cause you harm? So like I say, it's a bit of a roundabout way of answering that question, but I think we're doing better, but it's just such a changing landscape that we need to keep altering. And I would like to say to the audience as well, with CDR, you can join the group that is now global, and you can put in your observations from your work and say, well, actually, if this was in the framework, it would really improve it. Or when we're measuring our capabilities on like a maturity matrix, you need to add this little bit in. The community is very open to make it work for industry because, as you say, this is your future. You are the digital natives. You need to be aware of the pros and the cons of being in a digital society. And if you just sit back and let it wash over you, then there's going to be problems in 10 years' time about how transparent we were, whether the big tech, I mean, you saw at the inauguration of Trump, all the big techs, apart from Microsoft, sitting there who are going to govern what we do. Now, you think the big techs, the servers, most things runs off Google, right? We're on Google Meets right now. So we need to hold people to account as much as possible and critically think, ask questions, to see that we can continue to ask people to do better.
Okay, great. Thank you, ma'am. So, and my last question, how will future employees be trained to uphold CRT principles in AI development and deployment?
Yeah, so we recognize there's a gap in the market. Okay, so also as part of CDR, we have a digital responsibility forum. So that's a group of people like myself who have got experience and expertise, but we can rent ourselves out. So say if you were a startup, you don't have a lot of money, but you want to be responsible. How do you get those skills into your company at the outset? We offer those for free. Then it goes on economy of scale. So say if we were talking to a large JP Morgan, for instance, we would obviously charge them more of a consultancy fee. But in order to get people to have access, because for me, working in academia and in industry, knowledge should be shared. It should not be proprietary. It should be shared to avoid these harms and to move people forward. So what we do with the DRF is, if you've got a question, you can go on the website, you can ask it, and one of us can answer that for free. Or you can get a bit of consultancy, because if you're starting up an organization, usually small, you're trying to raise capital, and this is probably not your number one priority, if we're honest. Your priority is to make a profit, to grow, right? Everybody wants to make profit. Profit in itself is not a bad thing. But the Harvard Business Research will show that if you are emotionally intelligent and responsible in your business, you will have 15% more return on your investment. If you go in just profit driven, you won't make as much money. So that is how the shift in the mindset is changing, and CDR can help you. But to get access to the skills, we recognize not everybody's going to get them. It's not readily taught in universities as a typical course. I mean, our university does because they have me, but that's not carte blanche across universities. But what we do is, through that group, we can actually rent out services and help people get the skills that they need. And gradually that gap will reduce.
Oh, great. So thank you for the useful answers. They have been really helpful in clarifying the topic. I hope the participants were able to follow along and understand the key points you shared. So your insights have certainly added value to the session. So
Yeah.
thank you so much, Professor Karan, for joining us today and sharing your incredible insights on corporate digital responsibility in the age of AI and Gen AI. Your passion, experience, and deep knowledge have truly inspired us and sparked meaningful reflections on how we can all contribute to building a more ethical and inclusive digital future. We are especially grateful for the way you made complex ideas so engaging and accessible, and for reminding us that innovation without responsibility is a missed opportunity. So, your presence today has added immense value to our session. We are sure the impact of your words will stay with us for a long time. So, on behalf of everyone here, so thank you once again for your time, wisdom, and leadership. We look forward to continuing this journey of responsible innovation and inspired by your example. So, wishing a continuous success in everything you do. So, thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. And like I say, just stay curious, ask questions. And if you want to reach out, you can find me on LinkedIn. Okay.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, great. So, and just
All
wait
right.
for the few seconds. Just wait. Ma'am, can you able to see the virtual memento?
Oh, yeah. Thank you very much.
Great. So, on behalf of Mastering Up, we present this visual memento as a tribute to our guest speaker today, Professor Karen Elliott. So, her insightful contributions have enriched our knowledge and inspired us profoundly. So, this token of appreciation symbolizes our gratitude for your expertise and dedication. So, thank you for
Oh,
sharing.
I look forward to adding that to my wallet. Yeah, I've got a few. They're good.
Yeah, sure, sure. Then definitely we will meet in future collaborations also. Sure. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Absolutely. They say collaboration is the way forward.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much. Definitely we will meet you in another session.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Sure. Shall we leave the session
Bye.
now? Yeah, sure. Bye, ma'am. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.